Okay.
Okay, perfect.
Sorry.
You want me to bring you a drink?
Oh, yeah, thank you. Sorry. Swallowed a bug or something.
Probably not an assassin bug.
First one of the season.
There's one behind the screen and one.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So, let's not going forward here.
It's the same issue that we had last.
1 second, please.
The back one. Space bar.
Yeah, we're running into a little bit of a technical difficulty here.
Down in the left, the side,
All right, so first off, this sounds like a simple question, but it can be tricky. What is wildlife? And so when I think about wildlife, there's a lot of different things I think about. And most of the time, if I were to ask a group, what's wildlife? They say, that's wild animals, wildlife. Well, I remember in grade school, whenever I tried to come up with a definition, the teachers always told me I couldn't reuse the words of the word I was describing. So if I said wildlife is life that's wild, that's kind of cheating. So the definition I'm presenting us with here today is the non-domesticated animal species that occur on the landscape. And so that includes mammals, reptiles, and amphibians, birds, and insects. So if I ask the group, how many species of wildlife do you think we have in Maine? Different species. Any guesses?
1,000.
1,000? We're more than that.
Yeah.
20,000.
20,000. We got a guess at 20,000. Anybody else got a guess? Well, the answer is around a little over 15,000. And we're just determining new ones all the time. And this is a really important thing to think about when we're thinking about managing for wildlife species, because if I were to ask you to name all the wildlife you can think of or name the species that are important to you, most of the time I get, turkey, deer, bear, grouse, woodcock, New England cottontail, snowshoe hare, squirrels, red squirrels, gray squirrels, flying squirrels, all these sorts of things. But would anyone think to say the ringed bog haunter, the cobra clubtail? These are all things that live in Maine. So these are different dragonflies that live in Maine. And so the reason I bring this up is because there's of the over 15,000 species of wildlife we have, less than 100 of them are things we hunt and fish. There's only about 423 bird species, 61 species of mammals, 39 species of fish, 18 species of amphibians, and 17 species of reptiles. And the rest of them, 15,000 and more, are insects. And that's important because when we're thinking about the different wildlife that we're trying to manage for, and we're thinking about things like the food chain and the food web, those insects are really down at the bottom of that in terms of things that are important for pollinating, very important for our food sources, but also for things that are important for our food for our other wildlife that then eat other wildlife, then eat other wildlife. It's their whole chain of food chain there. And so I always start with this slide because I want us to think about that when we're thinking about wildlife habitat management. So we're not just thinking about one or two species. Those, though that may be our favorite species, we're also thinking about the impacts it has on other species of wildlife when we're doing management activities. Now, within our wildlife species, we have something called Species of Greatest Conservation Need, SGCN. So I work for a government agency, which means we use acronyms. If anyone here has ever spent any time working for a government agency, working for the federal government, or in the military, or anything, you've heard acronyms. So the one, I promise we're going to use just like one or two acronyms today, and SCGN is one of them. Species of Greatest Conservation Need. So these are species of wildlife that require immediate or targeted conservation attention due to threats on their survival, rarity, or limited range.
It should be SGCN, not SCGN.
Oh, I swapped those two letters. Thank you.
Okay, just being a pain.
No, that's all right.
Thank you.
So SGCN, my bad. Anyways, so species of greatest conservation need are ones that we focus a little bit more on because they're heading the wrong way. So they're not necessarily threatened or endangered, but something is causing them to head that direction. And as a state wildlife agency, our job is to keep common species common. It's to protect endangered and threatened species and to provide hunting and fishing and recreation opportunities. Well, these are the species that we've identified that something's happening that's making them head a direction that's not that good. And our goal is to prevent them from becoming threatened or endangered. Because once something becomes threatened or endangered, a lot of specific legal protections have to be put on it, which makes things more difficult to manage and causes a lot of increased costs. And sometimes we find that it's better to fix an issue before it becomes a major problem. And so when we're talking about our species of greatest conservation needs, some of those challenges could be they are in, it's like our, let's say our salt marsh sparrow. It's in a habitat type that isn't very common, in a habitat type that's been impacted in the past by the draining of salt marshes, the rising water levels, the development of shorelines, and things like that. So we can say, let's figure out how we address that specific issue. Other things might be like our bald eagle, which used to be an endangered species. And this is a particularly noteworthy place to be talking about bald eagle because Androscoggin Lake was one of the last good spots for bald eagle in the state of Maine. It was a really important part of its recovery. And so I have a very fond memory as a kid of watching two eagles lock their talons above Androscoggin Lake as they tumbled down in this breeding display. And it really speaks to me a lot. But those are the sorts of things we're focusing on, is those species that are heading the wrong direction. And so we know that there's over 15,000 species of wildlife in Maine, but when we break down our number of wildlife that are species of greatest conservation need, we get into 700 or around 700 and something species of greatest conservation need. And that is means that they're in different priorities of highest, high priority, or medium priority. Now, a highest priority species is on the brink of becoming threatened or endangered, or becoming threatened. A priority 2 species is somewhere just below that, and a priority 3 species is something that's just starting to become a concern. And we're always trying to decrease the priority of a species. So we want to do what we can to bring a species from priority 1 to priority 2. And a perfect example would be species like our bobolink, which is a grassland bird. A lot of our dairy farmers and cattle farmers are very familiar with it. It's found in mature grasslands, which aren't super common here in the state of Maine. And it needs tall grass until July 15th, which is much later than when we want to cut our first crop of hay. And so we do a lot of work to help work with farmers and landowners to identify where their bobolink are and come up with a strategy to maybe avoid harvesting hay or putting our cattle through that portion of the field where the majority of the nests are, which is usually the middle. By doing an outreach like that, we're able to then do a little bit of delay and get more bobolink. And so those are the sorts of actions that can help bring us species priority from 2 to 3. Because a lot of times when I'm talking with a farmer, they're like, well, I have to pick one field to be the last one I mow anyways. I might as well pick the field that is full of bobolink to be my last field that I hay. And in doing so, I'm not really changing my management that much. And that species is being helped, and it's not costing me any money, and it's benefiting that species. And we might be able to start doing that enough across the state that we can bring a species down from like priority 2 to priority 3, which is good. And so that's what we're trying to do with our species of greatest conservation need. Every 5 years, we have to reevaluate this whole list of species. And we do that by bringing in wildlife biologists from the state of Maine, Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, but also U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We bring in staff from the U.S. Forest Service, the Maine Forest Service, land trusts, nonprofits, private landowners, and it's a very large public process where people come in and they bring forward the information that they have about these species, and we look at maps, we look at species occurrences and all of that. And every 5 years, we create a list of species of greatest conservation need. in a list of the actions we need to take to help address their species concerns. And that's called the State Wildlife Action Plan. We're required to do that by the federal government in order to access specific conservation funds that help fund our agency's activities as we help manage for those species. And so it's a very robust process that's done periodically. It helps benefit our wildlife. Any questions so far? Yeah.
How is the moose right now? I know it was.
I believe that we have moose as a priority 2 species.
Okay.
And part of the thing that also drives the species priority, both from the biological standpoint, but also the cultural importance too. So our moose, which might be a priority 2 or 3, and maybe it's just a 3, it is doing okay, but we need to keep a special extra eye on it because it is a culturally important species here in the state of Maine. And so that's where we need to make sure we're paying attention to regulations, to harvest, to things like the winter tick issues.
Right.
And because a species is listed as species of greatest conservation need, doesn't mean that the actions are don't harvest it, no hunting of it, nothing. It's just saying we need to be mindful because we want to make sure we don't do something that brings it in the wrong direction.
I thought it was higher than that.
The moose?
I went to a thing last year. Where the state made was presenting about the moose and how on the edge it is in trouble.
Yeah, I'd have to look up, but I could look that up after I do my presentation and let you know. I thought it was either priority 2 or priority 3. But I could check. We just came out with this new update, and so
I thought it was a higher, closer to really going under protection.
I'm not familiar with our moose heading towards any sort of threatened or endangered status. No, it's a managed population, and we can definitely maintain a harvest and all that. The biggest challenges we're seeing with the moose is the winter tick issues, which cause an increased mortality rate. And since that's happening, we have to constrain our harvest numbers in certain regions to help mitigate that. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that it's heading in an endangered or threatened direction. It just means that there's a new stressor that we need to make sure we're addressing in our habitat, in our harvest management plans. So.
And is this Maine in general or Androscoggin?
The species of greatest conservation need list is maintained for the entire state. And then we have mapped occurrences throughout the state so we know. So for example, on the right-hand side of our list here, these are species of wildlife and plants that are on the species of greatest conservation need list that are located here in the Androscoggin Lake focus area.
Can you explain the colors and what they mean?
Yeah. So on the right, and it's a little hard to see, we have the species name. So this is bald eagle, and then it's its scientific name. And then we have the state status. This is a species of concern. And then there's the state rarity. So there's these codes like S4B or S4N. And so that's telling us how rare it is with the state in the state of Maine. And then we have the global rarity, which is how rare it is across the globe. And so some things might be very rare in Maine, but could be common elsewhere. Some things might be very common in Maine and very rare elsewhere. And so this list is determined to be what we're looking at from a Maine perspective, but we also present what other regional perspectives are on it might be. And so then when you look at our plant species, you'll see that some of these species are endangered or state threatened, which means that here in Maine, they're limited in a way that we're concerned about them disappearing from the landscape.
So if, for instance, the bald eagle is not at the same level in New Hampshire versus Maine, what does Maine do since New Hampshire is so close?
Yeah, that's where we would work in like regional conservation partnerships where we could work with adjacent states. So here's a perfect example. Common loons are doing pretty well here in Maine compared to other parts of their range. And there's been work where we have taken common loon chicks here in Maine and brought them down and put them on lakes in Massachusetts to help reestablish the population in Massachusetts. Eastern turkeys are doing just fine here in Maine.
Yeah.
But we fly turkeys in boxes to Texas as part of a reintroduction program in Texas. And so what's might be working well here and might be overabundant here could be an issue elsewhere in its native range. And so, well, I can put you on the list. And believe it or not, we will capture the turkeys, put them in boxes, put them on an airplane, and they fly to Texas, and they've never had a single turkey die during that process. They're very tough
Wow.
birds, and they can survive that flight no problem. If you were to try to transport a rough grouse like that, it would literally die of a heart attack on the way there almost every time. So, alrighty. So I've talked a little bit about what wildlife is. We've talked a little bit about species of greatest conservation need. Now what I want to do is talk a little bit about managing for wildlife on your property. And we're going to go really high level here. There's really 4 basic principles. And through books like what we have out in front of us here, we can figure out what we need to manage for our target species. So if that's a species of greatest conservation need, you can go on our website, or we can get you a copy of our state wildlife action plan. You can find that species you're interested in that you know might be on your property. And there's a list of conservation actions that you can take as you manage to meet those species needs and integrate that into your wildlife habitat management plan or your wildlife habitat management activities you're partaking in on your property. Any questions before we move into the management discussion?
Someone should.
Oh, I read it out loud.
Oh, we have those all answered out loud?
Okay, but it's people. If
Oh.
you no high day out there, like mine will.
I don't know.
I'm having a hard time hearing that question.
Can you drop it in the chat, perhaps?
It's our wonderful internet system, the other end.
Hopefully it's video.
Well, I will continue, and if we can figure out what
Yeah.
that question is, I can come back and answer.
Monitor the chat.
So, yes, Guy.
I got a question on my land, for some reason, these red vines with thorns on them, that'll rip your clothes apart. They seem to be coming everywhere.
Mm.
Is it just recent, or is it just that be in my area?
So that's probably multiflora rose, which is an invasive plant species. And what we're seeing is that all over the state, plant species that aren't normally found in Maine, that aren't native in Maine, are getting introduced through a variety of ways, whether it's through people bringing them in and planting them, or people accidentally exposing them in their soil because they're bringing soil from out of state or somewhere else, and they're getting spread throughout the state. Traditionally, we found that most invasive plant species have usually stayed in the southern portion of the state, but we're starting to see those creep into other parts of the state as well. And so that's probably what you have going on, is an invasive plant species.
Rip your pants apart, or rip your shirts apart?
Oh yeah, yep,
Rugged stuff.
really
And you're
really
trying to get
tough.
in and pull it, and the roots are everywhere.
Yep, and so most of the time in those instances, an herbicide application might be the best option. We can talk about that after, and one of us could come out and visit with you too and look at that, because if you can't kill the root system, it's going to keep growing. So one thing I want to talk about too here is when we talk about managing for wildlife habitat, and especially species of greatest conservation need, and really all species of wildlife, Maine is unique in the sense that 94% of the land in Maine is privately owned. And so that is not common throughout the rest of the country. Most other states have a larger portion of state parks, state land, national park, national wildlife management refuges, things of that nature. Maine is one of the top 5 most privately owned states in the country. And so because of that, a lot of this conservation activity that needs to take place to benefit our species of greatest conservation need has to take place on private lands. And if it's taking place on private lands, that means it's voluntary actions done by the landowners. So on the state-owned land that we have, we can go out and say, our number one goal here is this rare butterfly, and we're gonna manage for it. But we can only do that on a very small portion of the land. And so really, through outreach, education, and providing people with all the information they're looking for, our hope is that we can identify landowners who are interested in managing for some of these species, and we can hook you all up with the tools you need to do that management. Because without our private landowners, these species management plans are not possible, because there isn't enough land under the control of non-private entities to do any sort of management fixes through anything like legislation or anything like that. So what is habitat? Habitat is one of those words to me that, like, if anyone asks you, can you tell me what wildlife habitat is? You're like, yeah, of course. And then we're like, all right, can you give me the definition? It's like, I never really thought how to put words to it. It's just where the wildlife is, right? Well, wildlife habitat is really the area that provides an organism with all of its requirements necessary for survival. And so there's 4 principles of that we're going to talk about today. They're going to be food, water, shelter or cover. Those words can be used interchangeably. And then space. Space being the space that you need to contain all of those things. So space, food, cover, and water are the 4 principles of wildlife habitat. And when we think about managing for wildlife, every single action we take is trying to adjust the quality and availability of one of these 4 principles. So we're going to start with space. Space is literally the geographic area that you are in. And so some species need a little bit of space, others need a lot. So a field mouse does not need nearly as much land to roam as a bald eagle. Some species can live their entire life cycle within a few acres. Others need half the planet. So think about right now, it's spring. Has anyone noticed there's a lot more bird activity, maybe at your bird feeders, or you're hearing the songs? Well, there are some birds that are on their pilgrimage home to Maine for the spring. And some of these birds are coming from the Andes Mountains in South America. One of this bird in particular, the black pole warbler, lives at high elevation in Maine, up on like up near the top of Katahdin and other forests like that, way up in the county. And it flies from South America nonstop over the Atlantic Ocean to Maine in a nonstop 3-day flight. This is a bird the size of a chickadee, and it flies nonstop for 3 days to get to Maine. And so when we think about the space that little bird needs, it's all of Maine, most of South America, and the whole ocean in between. And so that's a lot of space. Whereas we think about something like a chickadee, and it's going to live all its life within one small home range in the state of Maine. We think about something like a wood frog, and it's just going to be in a handful of acres around its water resources that it needs. So when we're thinking about the wildlife we want to manage for, we're going to think about the space that they require and where we fit into that. And so I might not be able to provide all the habitat needs for some of those birds, but I know they're passing through my property at some point, and so I can provide the habitat need that they need at that moment as they're passing through it. And so what can we do when we think about managing for space? Well, first thing, we determine the amount of space we have. You do a land survey, you get your forester to touch up your boundary lines, you check your tax maps, you know how much acreage you have. Maybe where you're fortunate enough that you're able to purchase more land. So maybe there's space adjacent to you that you can purchase. Or maybe you're friendly enough with your neighbor that you can say, hey, I'm going to start managing for woodcock on my property. We're neighbors. Are you interested in managing for woodcock as well? And we can work together. You have to determine the species you're interested in and how much space it needs. So a moose needs about 4,000 acres to hit all of its needs, right? Because moose like to eat woody debris, the tips of the buds of trees. Well, if you stop and think about it, when you weigh 1,200 pounds, that's a lot of buds that you need to eat. And we're talking about an animal that might need to drink gallons of water a day. So I can't manage for a moose on 30 acres. I know that if I zoom out, I'm going to say, okay, I have a woodlot up in Eustis. I had no moose walk through there. I know that I'm part of this big acreage that they're part of. What element of that can I manage for? And then you also just have to kind of be realistic of, if I don't have all the resources available space-wise to manage for the species I want, maybe that's not the species I focus my habitat management on. And so we have some great tools online that you can use to look at space and give you an idea of the undeveloped space. So we've gone through the entire state of Maine, and you can see here, it's hard to see, but we have all these green shapes all around here, and it says acreage. So over here it says 3,629 acres or 2,157 acres. We've gone through and we've mapped the entire state, and then we've removed all the roads, removed all the houses, removed all the development, and figured out what we call undeveloped habitat blocks. So these are the blocks of land that are continuous habitat. And you can look up where you live and figure out what size habitat block you are in. And so we know that we might be in a 2,157 acre habitat block, and that gives us an idea of the kind of wildlife species that are going to use that. So when we have undeveloped habitat, we can get all of these species we see right here: deer, moose, red fox, cottontails, mink, fisher, wood frogs, garter snakes, most of our reptiles, turkeys, ospreys, all of that. But once we start decreasing our habitat size down to the 100 to 500 acre block, some of those species disappear. So the moose is no longer present because a moose needs more than 500 acres to live on. And then when we continue that and we get down to 1 to 20 acre blocks, this is where we start only getting home ranges for some of the smaller species. So a skunk can live on 20 acres. A raccoon can live on 20 acres, same as a squirrel. But some of our things like our deer, our turkeys, stuff like that, they're no longer going to be able to meet all of their needs in that acreage. So by looking at space, we can get a good idea of what we can manage for. The other thing we do is we have these maps where we can look at what we have as known rare animals on our property. So all of these dots represent some sort of rare animal or rare wildlife habitat type, oftentimes a species of greatest conservation need. So you can look up and say, I know I'm in the vicinity of one of these species. Now what can I do to help manage for that? And all these maps are available at the Beginning with Habitat website, which is part of Maine Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. But if you're not able to access the website, you can always send one of us an email and tell us where your property is, and we can pull these maps together for you and either email them back to you or mail them to you. So we can make sure that anyone can get access to them no matter what their technical savviness is. And so to recap with our space, what we really do is we focus on what we have for land. We work to help keep parcels around us intact and keep our land intact, and we can work with our neighbors to help manage the space more accordingly to our shared goals and objectives. Any questions on space? All righty.
Could you say again who we email to get a habitat map of our land?
Yep. If you send Olivia or Autumn an email, the email you use to sign up for this, we can send you to the website where you can make your own map with just a few clicks of a button, or if you give us your address, we can make the map for you and send it out to you.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. All right, my favorite part of habitat, food. Well, food's one of my favorite parts of everything. So today, the next element we're talking about for habitat is food. Food is really something that gets a lot of focus when we're managing, because people think of that as something that they know that every wildlife is going to need. But there's all kinds of different types of food. So for some wildlife, other wildlife is food. They eat insects, they eat bugs, they eat other species of wildlife. You know, our things like our mesocarnivores, our small carnivores, our bobcats, our lynx, they're looking for things like grouse, woodcock if they can grab one of them, snowshoe hare, things of that nature. Whereas a lot of our other animals eat other plants. So two major types of foods I want to talk about here are mast, M-A-S-T. Has anyone heard this term before? Well, with mast, what we're talking about are the fruits, berries, nuts, and seeds of the plants that are on the landscape. And so these are things that a lot of wildlife can eat. In one side of this, we have what's called hard mast, which are nuts and seeds, acorns, beech nuts, beaked hazelnuts, different seeds from pine cones or spruce cones or fir cones. And if the hard mass is the crunchy stuff, soft mass is the squishy stuff. So that's apples, raspberries, blueberries, viburnum berries, strawberries, all these sorts of things. Both of these food sources are important because think about if anyone in here eats peanuts or walnuts or anything like that, they're really full of fats and protein. Whereas you eat a fresh strawberry and it's really sweet, it has a lot of carbohydrates. Well, these are different food sources that become available during different time of the year, and they provide different value to wildlife. So our acorns are dropping in the fall, late summer, fall, right before wintertime. So that's when that really nutritionally dense food is being dropped. Also, things like our acorns and our seeds, animals can store for later in the year. You can take a pile of acorns and hide them in a hollowed out tree. And if no one steals them, you come back and there's a pile of acorns there. If you pile up a bunch of strawberries in a hollow out tree and come back 3 months later, there's no strawberries there. So these different food resources are important for different times of the year. And when we're managing, we're doing things to try to increase those different types of food resources. Other types of food resources are things like our grasses, our sedges, our rushes, and our agricultural crops. So yes, we know, especially if you're a farmer, turkeys like the same thing that you're trying to grow and sell, which is sometimes challenging. But these are called herbaceous browse. And so what we could also put in here are the twigs and buds of trees because things like our deer and our moose are eating that as well. And then we talked earlier about remembering about those 15,000 species of wildlife that are insects. Some of them, their food sources are pollen and nectar from plants. And so this right here, my favorite flower of all time, the New England aster. It blooms in the late summer, early fall, one of the last kind of shows of purple you see on the landscape before everything dies for the wintertime. And so these are really important sources too. And so when we're managing for our wildlife, we want to think about all these different food resources.
Like no mow May.
No mow May is a perfect example. In the early part of the year, we might find ourselves itching to get on our tractors and go mow our lawns. But by waiting, we can get a bunch of different herbaceous plants that grow up early and some flowering plants that grow up early that are loaded with insects that are really important for our songbirds who are showing up for the first time. And then also other types of food, insects, small animals, or aquatic food like amphibian eggs, tadpoles, fish, mussels, clams, or wetland plants as well. So this right here, American kestrel, got a grub in its mouth. These kestrels, you see them here in this area, sitting on your power lines on your field edge. They're looking for insects, so they're eating other wildlife. But even our small mammals are at risk of being eaten as well as even our larger mammals. So especially our moose calves can be predated on by bear early in the season, or deer fawns as well. So there's all kinds of different animals eating other animals in this chain. But one thing that people forget a lot though is in our vernal pools, our spring pools, like what are out right now, those amphibian eggs are target food resources for some wildlife as well. Tadpoles, you might not think about this because you don't see it often, but I've put out some trail cameras in the woods on streams and in little ponds, and you'll have great blue herons that are in the middle of the woods, and they're going after tadpoles or frogs inside of these vernal pools, or you'll see them walking in fields trying to get those amphibians. So all kinds of different food resources. And so when we're trying to manage for wildlife, we want to manage for food that is available year round for the species we're interested in. Everyone's favorite food resource, bird feeders, which unfortunately sometimes become bear feeders, which we get complaints about, are also an option when you're managing for food as well. So what can we do when we're managing to try to provide better food for our wildlife? Identify the current food resources we have, and maintain them. So if we have oak trees that are producing acorns, we want to make sure that we're maintaining some oak trees that are producing acorns. We want to help produce more hard and soft mass, so more fruits, berries, and seeds. So in the oak example, we might thin the canopy around our oaks so they produce more acorns. Or we might open up a hole in the forest canopy to produce some raspberries in the understory to provide some fruit. We also might maintain some open spaces that we periodically mow or bush hog to keep our herbaceous plants or leafy plants like our clovers, our shrubs, and things like that, because that's going to help provide food resources for a lot of our wildlife, a lot of our browsers, but also for our pollinators. A great thing to do is pollinator gardens or pollinator fields, where we find sections of field that we let go to flowers, and we leave those flowers until the late fall, late summer, early fall, when we've got all of the things that have gone through bloom. Because if you watch a field like that, you'll start seeing color popping up in the field in the next couple of weeks as our first early spring plants pop up, but you'll see those goldenrods and those asters stay yellow and purple and pink all the way through August into September. And if we're going to plant food for wildlife, we always want to plant natural food sources that we can find normally on the landscape. So right now, Androscoggin County Soil and Water Conservation District has an excellent native plant sale that you can buy plants online and go pick up in May, and you can plant them to help increase the native plants on your property.
They will actually be here next week. We'll have Lily Gallagher from the Androscoggin Soil and Water Conservation District.
Are they bringing plants?
I don't know, but I will ask.
My
I'll
only
see if they can, yeah.
My only concern with Androscoggin County Water and Soil Conservation District is that they might tell my wife the truth as to how much money I spent on plants this year if they call, because they have a really good plant sale, and I went a little bit crazy buying plants for my pollinator garden at home. So
Where's their plant sale?
their plants are you can pick them up in their Lewiston office, and I think it's the second week of May. So you order them online, and then they prepare them, and then there's one day you come pick them all up. There's other opportunities for native plant sales, but they're a little further away, like in Falmouth at the main Audubon Center. They have a native plant like weekend where they have all kinds of native plants for sale. And there's some great resources, because if you call the Soil and Water Conservation District and you say, I have a wet site that gets full sun, what can I plant there? They can give you a list. Or if you I have a shady site that's really dry, what can I plant here? They can give you a list as well. And so we can also help with those sorts of lists too. Alrighty, the next thing we're going to talk about, any questions about food, animal food, not what I'm having for dinner. All right. And if anyone's interested, we now know the term, we have apples or soft mast in the back of the room that we can all forage on our way in and out, just like our wildlife. So next thing we want to talk about is cover. Cover is the space that wildlife use for protection, the space that they use for nesting, the space that they use to avoid the elements. So I hear all the time people are like, I don't understand how these wildlife can just handle it out in the cold or the wind or the rain. It's like, well, they don't stand in the cold or the wind or the rain. If it's snowing and raining, they get under the cover of a fir tree, or they crawl inside of a cavity of a hollowed out tree. Or one of my favorite wildlife, do something I wish I could do. Our bears, they kind of pretty much hibernate most of the winter. They find a good place to relax for a few months out of the year. And so when we're thinking about our wildlife, we want to think about that cover. So is there any deer hunters in the room? All right. Well, you ever notice when you're in when you're in the woods, if it's completely open understory, maybe not on the shop property where there's deer everywhere, but if there's completely open understory and you can just see for yards and yards in the woods, that's not normally where you see the deer moving around the most, right? You normally are jumping them out of thickets, out of thick woods, out of shrublands and things like that. And that's because that's what they're looking for, is looking for cover. And so you can look at some woods, or you can look at a city park and say, there's some tall trees, there's plenty of cover, but that doesn't really tell the whole story. And so when we're managing for wildlife, we want to manage for different cover all over the landscape and at different levels. So we're going to start here by talking, and I'll warn you, I'm starting to talk forestry. So Julie sometimes has to rein me in because I'm not a forester, I'm a biologist. So feel free to jump in, Julie. But we're going to talk about the three kind of different areas that we have cover. Our overstory, which is anything over 30 feet tall. Our mid-story, which is something between 6 and 30 feet tall. And our understory, which is the forest floor up to 6 feet tall. And so we want to think about these three things when we're thinking about cover in the forested landscape, for example. So overstory, 30 feet tall, what overstory does a really good job of providing is certain species of wildlife like to be up tall in the trees. So has anyone ever heard of warblers before, the birds? Black-throated blue warbler, black-throated green warbler. Well, I'm a bird watcher, and there's this thing we get called warbler neck. And it's because warblers all live in the top of trees, so you spend all day like this looking for your warblers, and your neck is sore by the end of the day. And we call it warbler neck. They're up there because that's where they nest, some of them nest, but that's also where some of their food resources are. So some of the insect life and things like that are living up there at the canopy. And so there's certain bird species that if there's not a lot of 30-foot or taller forests, they're not going to show up. So if anyone's ever seen a scarlet tanager, a really bright red bird, they are almost always seen in the canopy of a mature forest. And so if you have an early successional forest or a young forest, you're not going to see them in there. The other thing about our overstory is height does not mean a tree is older. And so this is a conversation Julie and I have with people all the time. A tall tree does not necessarily guarantee it's an older tree. But generally speaking, when we have tall trees that are 30 feet or tall or more, they are getting to a more mature part of their life cycle. And for things like our oaks, our beech trees, that is when they start producing those beech nuts or those acorns. And so trees and wildlife always make a liar out of me. You'll probably in a month go find an acorn on a tree that's only 10 feet tall and be like, Joe doesn't know what he's talking about. But generally speaking, it's those overstory trees. So if we want to provide that food resource and that cover resource, we need to promote some trees to get to that age class. And the other thing too, from a forestry perspective, once we get trees to the point where they're producing seeds, they're producing nuts, they're producing cones, they're producing the things that other trees can end up growing from, those are our future seed sources for what else we want in our woodlot. And the other thing too is usually once trees get taller, they have the ability to get larger in diameter. And we have certain species of birds, certain species of wildlife that need large diameter trees with big holes in them to nest. And in some extreme instances, we've actually had like these like 80, 90, 100-foot massive pine trees that have broken off. We had one break off 30 feet up and it hollowed out at the top. And every year there was a bear that would climb that tree and then den in the top of the tree. And there was one person that worked for us whose job was to climb up in the tree and reach over and jab the tranquilizer down in there to get the bears during the wintertime to check on their cubs and stuff. But you can't get that with a tree that's too small. And so usually to get to those larger trees that provide those cover resources, we need to get things in the canopy. Mid-story, 6 to 30 feet. So those are some of our trees that might either be young versions of trees we see in the canopy or some trees that might only get to that height, trees and shrubs. And so this provides a really good opportunity for a lot of other wildlife because certain species of wildlife, certain species of birds, they nest at about 6 to 30 feet off the ground. They don't want to be up in the canopy, but they like to be down lower. And the other thing too is at this size, there's certain shrubs and bushes that they don't get much over 10 feet tall, but that's when they start producing the soft mass that animals want. So things like our maple leaf viburnum or our wild raisins, that's where they get to a point where they're starting to produce some of those food resources. And then we have the understory. This is, I call my story because I'm under 6 feet tall. So this is where I live. My wife, she gets into the mid-story. She's 6 feet tall. So she finds the birds for me up there. This is where we find things that are low shrubs, low bushes, things that we see a lot of fruits on. But also these are things that get really, really thick and dense. So even in the young stage of a forest, a lot of times when things are dominating the understory, there's way more stems of trees than there are going to be in the future. And as they grow, some of them die off. That's like self-thinning. This is where we get some of our thickest landscapes. So has anyone here ever just like looked at like a wall of shrubs 6 feet tall that it's just like impenetrable? Have we seen that before? And some of our clear cuts up north, we get these walls of something called hobble bush. And they call it hobble bush because it hobbles you as you walk through. I like every native plant in the state of Maine except for that one because I spent hours and hours of my life getting hobbled by it. Great wildlife plant though. So this is where we want to maintain some of those understory trees and shrubs because it's really helping us provide some of that really dense habitat. And that's where some things like our small mammals, I mean, if you're a snowshoe hare trying to get away from a coyote or a lynx, you're diving into the thickest habitat you can possibly find. And if you don't have that understory cover, might be a bad day to be a hare. And so what I want to mention here is when we're managing for forest, we can manage in a way to have all three of these things in the same spot. And so when we think about our overstory, midstory, and understory, I kind of think of it as like a hotel that has over 30 floors. Well, if we don't have anything in the understory, think of that as the first 6 floors are under construction and there's no one who can live there. If we don't have anything in our midstory, floors 7 through 30 have nothing that are under construction, no one can live there. If we only have things in our overstory, that means we're only opening up a little bit of place to live. If we manage our forests so we have big tall trees, and then underneath them we have medium trees, and then underneath that we have shrubs and bushes, we can get all of the different wildlife species who want to use those different levels in the same spot. So with the same amount of land, you can double or triple the types of birds you have on site, or the types of amphibians you have on site, or the types of wildlife you have on site. In the understory, we can also do things like make brush piles. And so a lot of us, if we're out cutting firewood, we're delimbing the trees in the woods anyways. And so we can just take those limbs and pile them up and make brush piles. Some people have called these in other parts of the country where there's more rabbits, they call them rabbitats because rabbits will live in them. I know, that's a pretty good joke. My dad joke's going. And for example, I worked with a landowner who just had a harvest and they hadn't had time to have their understory grow back in. And he took all of the brush and put them in different piles. And we went out after a fresh snow and you could see snowshoe hare tracks going to each one of these brush piles. I've talked my dad into making a bunch of brush piles on his property. And in part because I'm the oldest of 3 boys. And when we used to do firewood, my dad would tell all 3 of us boys, all right, bring those branches down, limb them up, and we'll use that for kindling or something. Well, once all 3 of us boys moved out of there and I mentioned brush piles, also my dad's like, I don't have my help. I'm just going to leave the brush in the woods and maybe make some brush piles and get some wildlife habitat instead. And it's a really good resource because any given winter, if you go over and you kick a brush pile or hit a brush pile, you'll hear scurrying inside. Those are the small mammals. And I've watched owls, actually over in Livermore, I watched an owl fly in and land at a tree because I was deer hunting. And there was a brush pile in front of me, and there's a mouse squeaking in there all day. And that owl flew in and landed on the brush pile because it knew that mouse was there. The mouse immediately quieted down. And the owl actually then took off and landed in the tree above me, lifted its tail, pooped straight at me, and then flew off. But it knew that brush pile was where there was cover, and where there's cover is its food. And so we can help promote that on our landscape.
Snakes go there.
Snakes, absolutely. Standing dead trees. So these are trees that are dead or dying that are still standing and they're starting to rot, so you get holes in them. And there's certain bird species who need those cavities. So wood ducks have been around a lot longer than wood duck boxes. So they must have nested somewhere before we were building boxes for them. It was these cavity trees. Now, do you think the wood duck was out there like a woodpecker pecking at the tree to make the cavity? No. These are cavities that are formed by insects, formed by by woodpeckers, and then utilized by another species of wildlife. So when we're managing for our wildlife, especially like when we're thinking about some of our species of greatest conservation need, we need these standing dead trees that we used to operationally say, oh, we got to push those over because those are widow makers. We need to get rid of them. Well, keeping these standing dead trees can be really beneficial to our wildlife. So when we're talking about cover, we want to talk about maintaining a diverse age structure, an overstory, a midstory, and an understory, retaining standing dead trees, maintaining wood on the ground, like our brush piles, or just logs on the ground that are species of trees that we can leave behind. Anyone ever roll a log over as a kid and find a salamander under it, or a frog, or something like that, or grubs? We want to leave those behind for wildlife. And then in our field landscape, if we're not an agricultural producer, we can consider delaying mowing in our field until after the breeding bird season or until after our wildflowers have come and gone. And then if we want to do some more hands-on projects, building things like bird boxes, bat boxes, can also be beneficial to provide cover for our wildlife. So any questions on cover? Righty.
You know what makes a great bat box?
What's that?
Shutters.
Shutters. Yep. Well, they.
Ones that are right on the wall and don't move.
Yep, especially on the south-facing side.
They
So
love
the
it.
bats are looking for those really, really warm spots. Water. So water, everything, we're made of water. Most things are made out of water. Water is important for everybody and everything. In Maine, we have lots of water. We have our lakes and ponds, rivers and streams, bays and oceans, coastal wetlands and salt marshes, freshwater wetlands, vernal pools, puddles, skidder trails that have flooded, everything you can think in between. We have tons of water in the state of Maine. And we're fortunate. Water is generally not a factor that limits wildlife opportunities on our properties here in Maine. In other parts of the country, water is liquid gold, both for humans and for wildlife. So we're really fortunate here in Maine. So oftentimes what we're trying to do is just focus on maintaining healthy water quality and good water. And we're doing that by making sure that all of our water resources, we're just not disturbing them with logging, with forestry, with mowing, or with dredging or anything like that. So we're really just trying to maintain good water resources. Right now in particular, has anyone ever heard of vernal pools?
Mhm.
This is the time of year that we get vernal pools. So vernal meaning vernal equinox, meaning spring, and then pool of water. These are temporary pools that show up during the spring, and they're caused by all the spring snow melt and the runoff, and they collect in these little pools of water, and they're only around for a few weeks, but they're extremely important because there are species of frogs and salamanders that migrate to these pools right now, like this week, to breed there. And some of these frogs and salamanders hop and crawl a mile to get to them. And so a mile doesn't sound like a lot, but when you only hop this far every hop, that's a lot of hops to get to a mile. And so they're putting in all that energy to get to these pools and lay their eggs and then leave. And in these vernal pools, all of those eggs that survive will turn into salamanders or frogs this year, crawl out and repopulate the landscape. These pools are always fishless because if there's a fish in there, they eat all the eggs and the eggs don't stand a chance. They're found in our forests and they provide really critical breeding habitat. And so this is what a vernal pool looks like that we took a picture of in May. And that's what it looked like in August. So if we look how big of a change there is here, just in a few short months, this goes from what looks almost like, in some cases, like a pond to a wet meadow.
How do the amphibians know that those pools are there?
That's a really good question. It's something that's imprinted in them. So they were born there they return back to those pools, and they go right now during this time of year because we call it a big night. So when there's warm temperatures and rain, it triggers something in them to start migrating towards these pools, to the pools that they were born in, to breed again.
Just as soon as the temperature changes, listen at dusk and you will hear them.
Oh yeah, right now the spring peepers are going crazy, and the wood frogs and the spotted salamanders are on the move.
It's been wet enough so that you're gonna hear them good time.
Mhm.
One thing you don't wanna do is leave standing water alone in any pots or pans or anything that's outside.
No, they'll find them.
No, but so will the mosquitoes.
Yes, absolutely.
Even though I like bugs for birds, I don't like mosquitoes.
I don't love them either. Mr. Schott?
How soon will you be able to identify egg masses in the vernal pools this year?
Right now, like we're starting to get them like this week. And so a colleague of mine runs a program called Big Night, where they highlight areas across the state where we know there's a lot of amphibians crossing roads, and there's a lot of road mortality. So some of our species of greatest conservation need are our wood frogs and our spotted salamanders. And one of the big issues they have is when they're trying to cross the road at night, they get run over. And if you stand on the side of the road in an area where they cross and you hear cars driving, you can actually hear them popping as people are running them over.
Yeah.
And so this program is designed where volunteers go out and help them move across the road to get to that. And so they're laying their eggs within the next week or so. And then the eggs will absorb a bunch of water. And after they start to absorb that water, that's when we can kind of identify which species of egg it is. But right now we could go out and look and find egg masses. And like I have a pond on my property that already has egg masses in it that I can identify.
Is
So-
now when turtles cross too?
Yeah, they're all moving around right now too.
I thought I saw one the other day. I went close to one.
Yeah, but they'll be out
I
soon.
was worried.
Yeah.
Already run over.
Mhm. So when we're talking about our water resources, what we can do is figure out what we have on site for water. Make sure that our anthropogenic or human-made sources aren't blocking or filling our water sources. So if we have a clogged culvert, unclog it. If we have garbage or debris in our vernal pools, pull it out of there. Like if there's someone who has tires or trash or something like that. If our culverts are too small, and so water is filling those culverts and washing out at a high rate of speed, we can consider replacing those, all these sorts of things. And then where we have water, make sure we're maintaining a vegetative buffer around it. So we're not mowing right up to our water resources. We're not, cutting wood right up to our water resources, all those sorts of things. We're getting to your topic now here, Guy, the invasive species. So this looks like a beautiful flower. It is not a beautiful flower. This is purple loosestrife. This is taking the place of my favorite flower, the New England aster. And so invasive species are species that are not native to this landscape, and they outcompete and take control of the landscape and the opportunities for other species of plants. So perfect example, honeysuckle, glossy buckthorn, things like that. You'll start seeing in the next week or two a shrub in the understory that has green leaves before anything else. That's usually honeysuckle. And they get leaves earlier in the year. They produce berries earlier in the year, and they take up valuable spots for things where our native plants should be, like our native honeysuckles or our winter berries or things like that. Their berries are very low in calories, so birds eat them and they don't get very much benefit from them. They actually cause them to expel their stomach contents more frequently, and causes issues for the birds, causes issues for other wildlife. And not only are they not a great food resource, they're taking the place of a good food resource. And when we think about our wildlife that aren't the big furry and fluffy things and aren't the feathered things, when we think about our insects, much like monarch caterpillars, which are focused on only being on our milkweed, a lot of our plant species are the host for lesser known insects, and that's the only plant that they can live on. And so if our non-native plants take those spaces, there's not opportunities for our native insects. So a native plant here in Maine might host 200 species of insects on it. A non-native plant that takes its place might only host 10 or 20 species of insects. So it's really problematic for our insects, which are then problematic for the rest of our wildlife. And so the Maine Natural Areas Program maintains a ton of information about invasive species. Maine Woodland Owners does a ton of outreach about invasive species. The Maine Forest Service does. Maine Inland Fisheries and Wildlife does. All of our land trusts do. Our soil and water conservation districts focus on this. And invasive species are so bad for wildlife that our state wildlife action plan that we've talked about, where we have all of the species of greatest conservation needs listed and their stressors listed, since invasive species are a problem for almost all of them, we consider that one of the top 3 most important things you can do on your property for wildlife is to address invasive species. And that's how we can work to help benefit our species of greatest conservation need. So there's a lot of resources out there, but what we can do is we can learn about the different species, survey our property for them, review our guidance resources, contact our soil and water conservation district or other people to get assistance on how to manage for our invasive species and remove them. And in your situation, Guy, where you're just starting to see them, it's a lot easier to deal with them when there's 10 or 20 of them than if there's 100 or 50, 150 or 200 or 300 or 500 of them. And so early detection and early intervention for invasive species is really important. And so just the last couple notes here, when we're thinking about wildlife habitat, we can think about trying to make sure we get this wildlife habitat to be sustainable. And so there's programs like the current land use tax program, like things like tree growth or open space programs that can help provide tax incentives if you're managing your property, forests, or for wildlife. And if you are planning on trying to put even more conservation into your habitat, conservation actions into your property, there's also opportunities to explore easement options with your local land trusts. All right, that was a lot. For me, that was actually a short talk. I appreciate everyone sticking with me to this point, but I do have 10 or 15 minutes that I've been allotted to answer questions.
So far, we've answered the ones that are in the chat. Anybody in the room not got any questions answered yet?
What's the land trust you spoke of that you can,
Yeah, so it depends on what region you're in. So we have land trusts all across the state of Maine. And if you are a landowner who's looking to put your land in conservation easements, you can reach out to your local land trust. And there's this thing called the Land Trust Network online. And if you can look that up, or you can reach out to one of us and we can help connect you with it. And that's where you can start reaching out to build a relationship with your local land trust and ask, you know, would you ever be interested in conservation easement here? And there's a lot of paperwork and stuff like that, but that's where those conversations can start and take space.
well, what do they do?
So what happens with land trusts is they're essentially holding the development rights of the property. So the landowner can either gift their property to the land trust and say, you own the property, or they can sell a conservation easement to the land trust and say, I'm going to retain ownership of the property, but you are owning the rights to development. So now this property will no longer get any more houses, any subdivisions, any Walmarts or Dollar Generals or anything like that built on it.
For example,
I like
Maine
that.
Woodland Owners, we have a land trust program. We're not a land trust. We're a nonprofit focusing on education and outreach and doing things like this for you guys. But we also happen to have a land trust. And so we have a bunch of properties and we also have easements. One of my job responsibilities is doing monitoring of the easements. So we have a series out near Freiburg. And so my job is to go out there and make sure that the company that owns the land is abiding by the rules that we agreed on. So there's no development, they're managing the forest appropriately, there's no invasive species, and they're not doing anything against what we agreed.
So if a land management company, and just, you know, throw it out there.
Yep.
Comes in, so you decide you're gonna put it in, land and this land trust thing. So they come in and cut the trees and do all
It depends on the land trust. So for us, in our land trust, all of our properties are managed timberlands. So we work with Prentice and Carlisle and we manage all of our land trust properties in agreement with the landowner who donated the land. So for instance, if John decided he wanted to donate 10 acres to Maine Woodland Owners Land Trust Program, we would discuss with John, what are your goals and objectives for this property? What do you value about the property and how do you want it taken care of? And then we do our best job possible to follow through on those obligations, to take
So-
care of the land the way that it should be.
So that's, so being that you don't want any development there.
Yep.
But need to be able to have wildlife, but know what happens with down trees and.
And so those are all built into the standards of the easement. And so in some cases, like the land trust will say, we want to maintain hiking trails. And we are allowed to do the maintenance activities that help maintain those hiking trails. So we go in every 3 or 4 years and we mow the grass along the edge of the trails, or we remove down trees. A lot of conservation easements with land trust allow for forest management for the benefit of wildlife or forest health. So it's still varied. Some easements are a wilderness easement, meaning you can't do anything. And that's a management decision to say, we're gonna let this become old growth forest. There's a old road there. If a tree falls on the road, we don't pick it up. If something grows in or changes, we don't address it. We just let it go natural. And so it all depends on what the conservation organization is interested in doing and what the landowner is interested in doing. And what this does is it's a way to get conservation land that's privately owned on the landscape. So earlier I showed that pie chart that Maine is 94% privately owned. Well, about 22 or 23% of the state is in what we consider conservation land. So of that 6% that is non-privately owned, that includes, land owned by the Park Service and Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. But there's also across the landscape, 22 or 23% of the land that might be owned by a large timber company, but they have a conservation easement held by a land trust that says you can continue timber operations, but you can't do energy infrastructure and you can't do development of that land. Other conservation easements in the state have a wilderness approach where they're saying there's no management at all. We're letting it grow old and moldy, which is a good thing for wildlife, or for some species of wildlife. So it really is dependent on the landowner and the easement holder.
So like a large corporation like Irving that has a good part of the northern part of the state under its.
Management, and ownership.
Yeah.
So a lot of our large industrial timberland owners have thousands of acres of easements that are held by conservation organizations where they have agreed to certain management standards in that region or agreed to limited to just forest management. So they can maintain their roads for forest management, they can do that, but they can't, clear a mountain and turn it into a ski resort or put up a big energy development facility. So
Right. My husband cleared a beautiful, beautiful big maple grove. And he's been gone, and so it's all kind of gone back in and I don't want that. I want it to be back to where it was when he did it. And that was his goal, was to put it in conservation and make it all maintain. And what he was trying to do was maintain a beautiful forest.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you're ever looking for additional technical assistance on how to get that the way you want it to look and looking at options for long-term conservation, the four of us here, one of us can come help you.
Absolutely.
She's actually coming out.
Actually, I should see if you're available.
Perfect.
Yeah, maybe Joe can join us.
Yes, awesome. Any other questions? Yeah, Guy.
What type of herbicides do you use to get to the roots of these
Yeah.
invasive species? What does Roundup work?
Yeah, it depends on the type of species and it depends on what you're trying to do. But the most common one is glyphosate, which is what's in Roundup. And a lot of times what you're doing is you're cutting the thing that you want to get rid of, and you're spraying it just on the stem of what you just cut. And so that allows it to get pulled into the root system and slowly kill it off. There's different options for different types of goals and objectives, but that's the most common one. And what we always recommend is that if you're getting this done on a professional scale, always making sure you're consulting with somebody. But if you're doing it on your own private scale, following the label, what it recommends for both safety and application. And there's tons of resources available here at the state and also through people like Maine Woodland owners to help point you in the right direction on how to
I
deal
didn't
with it.
use Roundup anymore. I thought it was bad for the environment.
So the issues with some of the herbicide are on a broad scale usage. And so in examples like dealing with invasive species, like I've applied glyphosate, which is what is in Roundup, on species that I've treated, and I've mixed it at such low concentrations that a 3-gallon backpack only has about 2 tablespoons of Roundup in it, and then it's only applied in a specific location to a specific plant. And so where there's been issues with herbicides is in a much very different setting, usually more agriculture and the whatnot. With the invasive species component, it's very direct and very targeted. So it's a much different situation. So
When the wrong person uses the right means, they work in the wrong way, right?
Yeah.
So if we're responsible and we're checking all of our boxes and crossing all of our T's and dotting all of our I's, we can avoid all of the negative aspects that we've all heard about when we're dealing with invasive species or even just timber management and things like that.
and when a lot of times when people think about herbicide use, they also think about pesticide use. And so we think about maybe the book Silent Springs, written by Rachel Carson, who was a Mainer, and the mind goes right to that, like, oh, Silent Springs, it was killing everything off, it was all this problem. Well, those were pesticides, not herbicides, so those focused on insects. And also the way those were applied prior to that book is very different than they are now. And so it's much more highly regulated now, in part because of the great work done by people who said, we can't just be putting these things out willy-nilly. We need to get more focused on it and stuff like that. So there's been a lot of rules and regulations that have changed to make that work. Now, for some people, it's never going to be a good option. If you're an organic farmer, if you have certain health concerns, or your just comfort level is not there, it's not going to be the right option for you. It's just a tool in the toolbox. It's not the only tool. So
Okay, if nobody has any other questions, we'll take a 5-minute break.
get
We
your
can-
soft mast in the background.
Yeah, and the restroom, just as a reminder, is through the exit door to the right and then to the right again. It'll be the first door on your left. So we'll just, everybody on Zoom will be back in 5 minutes. We can turn audio and video off in 5 minutes. set up, of course. You guys on Zoom, we are going to get started here shortly. Give me one moment. We'll share our screen.
I want to build some strength. We want to be opposite people.
So
Don't even angry people.
let's hope this works again. Fingers crossed. And I'm gonna hand it off to Autumn. This did not work.
The technical difficulties.
I will handle technical difficulties.
So good at it.
I
I will
know,
be the chart master.
right? Yes. Need to be on this one. I don't want that. I just want to present.
You might just have to go the whole.
Yeah,
That's okay. I'll click through it.
okay.
Be soft mask.
Fantastic.
Figured we'd go healthy this week. Last week we brought donuts.
I was here last week.
He laughed.
There was none. By the end of it, everybody had eaten all the donuts.
Can everybody on Zoom see the shared screen? The slides? I cannot see.
Did you lose Zoom?
No. Anybody on Zoom? Can I get a thumbs up? Can you see the shared screen?
Can I hear it?
Yep,
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
I see William gave me a thumbs up, okay. Okay, I'm gonna hand this off to Autumn and she's gonna get started with some wildlife management techniques. We're gonna get caught up in the slides real quick.
All right. While I get caught up in the slides real quick. No, don't mind me.
Just quick review, very quick
Mhm.
review.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Hope you
It's
guys
going
can see. All right, well, I'm Autumn. I am the wildlife biologist that is on staff with Maine Woodland Owners. Started back in October, so I'm still kind of feeling things out, seeing what people are interested in, and I thought that this would pair really well with Joe's presentation. He talked a lot about managing for wildlife and what you can do, but I'm going to be talking more about just simple ways of wildlife monitoring. If you have 2 acres, if you have 400 acres, this could apply to you. So a quick overview, just the significance. We're going to be talking about that a little bit, as well as why it's good to walk your land. And then we're going to get a little bit more in detail with some of the apps that I always recommend and literally use every day at this point. And then how that will play into remote wildlife monitoring. Oh, it went backwards. Don't mind me, guys. It still is. Sure. All right. So why do we want to monitor? Well, we want to make better stewardship decisions overall, and you can't really make those decisions if you have no idea what you're making them about. The other thing is learning your species composition. So what is actually using your land is super important. If you only have a couple songbirds that are usually your hardier winter species and nothing else, that might be a good sign that you might want to do a little bit more management. If you have an abundance of species and you're seeing birds fly by your window every day, all different ones, or you're seeing little critters like foxes run across your fields, that might be a sign that you're doing something good. This will also, by monitoring your species on your landscape, you can track those shifts. So when are things starting to return for migration? Are the red-winged blackbirds screaming outside our window yet? No? Then maybe it's not springtime. This will also allow us to, by watching our wildlife, when are they using those resources? So during breeding season, they're going to need different resources than maybe during the winter. In the winter, they're more worried about finding cover and just staying alive, whereas the summer, they're trying to fend for their babies. They're trying to find those insects that are going to give them the protein that they need to grow and flourish. Not only this, but also if you are actively doing like forest management and you are working with your woods to manage it in a way that will, benefit not only wildlife, but also economically, it's good to assess those habitat conditions in case you might want to catch something early that you could improve on. Some simple tools to get started. Binoculars, I brought mine. I'm not sure if anybody over Zoom can see it. These ones are a little bit more expensive. They were about $200 and I got them on sale. But they are a lifetime warranty. So if anything ever happens to them, the company is going to replace it. I can pass these around the room. They're the Vortex ones, but no worries, but they're kind of hefty. And they came with a nice bag and everything.
What's the specifications on them?
I think that one was like 1041.
It's right on the stem.
Yeah. It wasn't the best of the best. It was like the next one down.
But you don't always need the best of the best.
No.
You just need something that works, right?
Yeah, I'd be able to see something pretty decently far away across the field. I might not be able to see it like up close as if it was like a zoom camera, but you should be able to identify it with those.
They have some nice small ones I got my brain to.
Absolutely. I recommend getting yourself a good pair if you don't already have one. You're going to use them forever. Next thing you should get is a field guide. The Scats and Tracks book that is on the screen is one that I've used since I was like 18. But I also have a ton of books in front of you in here that I've also utilized and found very useful.
For those of you online, we will include the list of the books that we brought.
So many. A lot of them are Peterson guides. There is, I think, Kaufman might have another one for like birds specifically. The other thing you might want to get yourself is a journal. Just something you can write down what you've seen, where you've seen it, and maybe time of year and weather.
Yeah.
Your phone is another huge resource that you can just use, a tool that you can bring out with you. And we're going to get into that a little bit later. But also, I think a Garmin or a GPS unit of some kind is crucial if you have a large amount of land and you're just trying to make sure you're keeping track of where everything you're seeing is. And that could be a deer trail that you want to mark for later when you're hunting, or it could be just a bobcat trail you're just sort of interested in. So walking your land, it looks like, I hope you guys can see it in this room. The presentation kind of got jumbled a little bit with the words being a little small, but we'll just go through it. Walking your land is the simplest and cheapest option when it comes to monitoring. And like I said before, you can observe pattern. Does it work? Does it work for you guys? Okay. You can observe patterns and allows you to learn you can do some hands-on learning. So when you keep a record in your logbooks, like I said before, the important things are your date, potentially the time that you're seeing it, the location, what you think it is, as well as weather. I also think it's good to note that what is in the area, if they're underneath a good maple tree or a good oak tree that has a ton of hard mass coming off of it, all those little acorns, maybe note that down. That might be what is drawing them there. Other things you can do, just keep your eyes peeled for things like tracks and scat. You can identify it using your field guides. Also look for chewed leaves, buds, twigs, fruits, nuts, things like that, that are disturbed on the forest floor. Other things would be ground disturbance in general. So if you're looking for deer, they tend to bed down in the winter and you can find little piles of snow that are just melted, and I'll show that on the next slide. But you can also find little, for example, turkey and grouse make little dust bowls. Look for those game trails. That's what this picture is showing. It's very hard to see, I'm sorry. But it's between shrubby. Oh, wow. We're getting fancy in here. So those denser, shrubbier understories, you can even make out, if you look at the ground, at the leaf litter, see that it's disturbed. Half the time you can see that there's definitely been some animal action going through there. Another thing that most people don't even realize, I hear all the time people are like, I never heard anything in the woods today. And I'm like, well, did you sit there and you listen, or did you talk the entire time? So just sitting there and just letting things come around you will be a great way for you to know what's there. And then lastly, use your tools that I just mentioned, like your phone, like your log, your journal. Now I wanted to give a couple examples, especially for Maine. I kept it with simple, general examples that we can all connect with and see every day. Deer is a big one. I'm sure you guys know. Like I said, they have ground disturbance. This is a pile of leaves that were brushed aside and they definitely bedded down there. This is your melted snow patch. This is your scat. And these are just rubs against a tree, which they could have chewed off or they could have just rubbed their antlers on to try to get rid of that velvet. Next one is our ground dwelling birds. So turkeys and ruffed grouse are what I decided to use. I know a lot of people up here will refer to ruffed grouse as partridge. Don't mind me, I like my ruffed grouse. Turkeys, they tend to like agricultural fields, tall grasses, things like that. And they'll make these giant dust bowls. And it's partially to clean off any of their little, like little mites that are on them, as well as drying out their feathers. It helps them clean it. Grouse will do the same thing, but they are more found in leaf litter. And a lot of times if you're walking through the woods, and I found one literally this weekend, they will be at the base of their tree. So springtime, they're going around trying to find ideal spots to nest, and you'll find them in little divots in the ground. And they try to tuck it up against either down logs, trees, things like that to keep it a little bit more shelter. And they don't really have bowls for their nests. It's only a partial bowl and they'll sit on it.
Do you have any thoughts for new woodland owners or Maine residents living in rural places or coming from a more suburban area who are really excited for wildlife, but also nervous about encountering said wildlife?
Fair enough. I think keeping a safe distance from everything is always nice. But usually turkeys will not come after you. At least I've walked up to them, but they do not like cars. I will say they jump out in front of cars. Yeah, absolutely, all the time. Depending on what species you're nervous about, I know in our next slide we'll show porcupines. Some people tend to think that they're gonna just, launch all their little needles at you, and that's not the case. They're just trying to live. Always healthy. It's always healthy to have a dose of precaution, but it might not necessarily be the scariest thing in the world.
Just don't startle them.
Yeah, don't startle.
Mostly all animals, like if you go out the porch at night and you've left food out there, don't walk out without the light on. The skunk is gonna get you first.
Yeah.
Or your dog, one or the other.
Right.
So another common thing that you guys might see in the woods are porcupines. And they tend to hang out up in the trees. And I've heard that they're a nuisance for foresters because sometimes you'll chop a tree, or a logger, you'll chop a tree and you'll have a porcupine fall on your head. But we love them. They do serve a purpose. You can tell where they're living because you'll find a little hole at the base of a tree and they'll carve it out and then they'll go up it. But the key sign is their little scat pellets are made of like little pieces of wood, because that's really what they're eating, and you can find those. And if you see that, this is the only species that really tends to do that in Maine, so you'll know there's a porcupine nearby. The other one is over here, is a squirrel midden. And this is an area where squirrels, especially when they find a really nice tree that has a ton of nuts they absolutely love, or pine cones in this case, they will sit there and they will pick them apart and they will bury it for long-term storage. And then as they're picking it apart, it will fall on the ground and it'll build up into these giant little piles. And then in those piles, you'll see little holes all around. That is something that a red squirrel is known for doing. And also, half the time you find them, you usually find the squirrels right there screaming at you. But these are just small little details that you can just note down in your logbook. And as you start noticing the really obvious ones, you kind of start to notice the smaller things that are not as popular and people don't talk about as much. Next. Which gets into really the bigger topic that I would like to talk about today. I think there are several useful apps. We have iNaturalist, which is right here. We have Seek, which is made by the same people as iNaturalist. We have eBird, we have Merlin, and we have Picture This. I will only be going through 3 of these more in detail. So iNaturalist, Seek, and Merlin, everything in blue. I find these to be the most useful and also the easiest to use. So iNaturalist is a great place to identify your plants, your animals, your fungus, and really anything. You could put tracks on there, you can put Scout on there, and it will, if you can't find it yourself to identify it, someone else online, some researcher out there who is bored, can help you identify it. It also is a great place to track what you've seen. So it'll keep a log of everything that you've done. It also allows you to discover things nearby and keeps track of, let's say you're like, oh, well, are the red-winged blackbirds coming back yet? And you can look on there and see if there's anything in your area for the last few days. This is a database that is used for science. One of my buddies, Will Gibson, he actually just got published. He did an entire study based off of images that were uploaded to iNaturalist on Cooper socks, and they was looking at their diet. And they actually found through images that people across the country uploaded, they're eating pigeons. And that is like their main food source, which was not what anybody else had.
Who's eating pigeons?
Coopers.
Coopers, oh yeah.
Yeah. They also had sharp-shinned hawks a part of that study. I'm not necessarily sure exactly what their top choice was, but I think it was in the same realm, those smaller birds. And they also found that other birds that are about that size also were one of the top targets. So that's really great to contribute to science in that way. But I also didn't want to just tell you about it. I really just wanted to show you how you would walk yourself through it. So this is mine. And I am not as avid as a user as I should be. But I do love it and I use it all the time. If you open up the app, it's going to automatically pop up to your observations. And this is everything that you've done. You're going to go down here to the little plus bar in your right bottom corner, and that's where you can add your observation. I uploaded a photo of a pickerel frog that I found last night, by the way, being a part of the big night. And then I uploaded the photo. It gives you this option right here where it asks, what did you see? If you click that, it's going to pop up with a bunch of answers that they think is the best option. And you can, if you think you can identify it just based off those suggestions, click it. And then it'll upload once you hit the check mark at the bottom. And other people will tell you if you're right or wrong. And if people agree, it'll get a research grade. One key thing to know, if you find something on your property for a species that you might not necessarily want other people to know about. So one thing that comes to mind for me is mushrooms, like chaga off of birch trees. If you don't necessarily want people to know where that location is, you can get rid of the location entirely, or you could just obscure it. If you feel that it's important to know that it's in the area, but don't really want to bring people to a direct spot, you can obscure it so they don't see it, so they can tell that it's there, but won't give an exact. This is just an image of the suggestions that would pop up, and after you select it, it goes right back into this, your observations right here, and it's good to go. This is, if you were to take this online, they will show you a map. I just populated it to the state of Maine, and I wanted to see what people were looking at only in the last couple weeks. And these were what were popping up, which is mainly herps, couple little bugs here and there, a couple moths. But this is a really good way if you're trying to see if something is in your area. You can go on here, look for your town, look for your county, and then it'll populate on the map if you want to look for a specific species. Seek, I think I like even better than iNaturalist. It's made by the same people, but it's just easier to use. It's a point and click. you automatically go onto this screen when you click the icon, and you just point it at whatever plant you're looking at whatever animal, and it'll pop up with its best choice. You have the option to do the common name or the scientific name, but you can choose whichever, and then it'll keep a log of your observations. But these observations don't necessarily go anywhere. Those are yours. Those won't go to science unless you link it to your iNaturalist and upload it there. So if you want to keep it private, that's totally okay.
Chad, when he was here, also mentioned some of these for invasive species as well.
Absolutely.
So if you guys see, like, you're like, I'm not sure if this is multiflora rose or a native species of rose, you can use iNaturalist or Seek, and it should be able to tell you.
Incredibly useful at that. I was using Seek all the time. I was doing landscaping last year, and I was literally going up to every single plant that I had, and I was trying to see what it was for, or what it was, and then I'd take the name and I'd go research how you would manage for it, or what it was used for, or how it would benefit wildlife.
We have a participant online, Bill Eaton, who recommended PlantNet, which is a website where you can take a photo of a leaf and you can upload it, and it'll do a similar thing where it gives you suggestions about the species.
Merlin is every birder's best friend.
Yes.
It has saved me more times than one. All right.
Sorry.
Everybody coughed at the same time. Merlin is really great if you are trying to get into birding, or even if you're not into birding and you just want to know what you're listening to. It can also be used alongside eBird, which I'm not going to get into too much today. But a lot of people will use the app of Merlin to identify the species and then go on eBird to log it on their little list, on their little checklist.
Life list.
Sorry,
Life.
life list.
Life list.
Clearly I like my Seek more than I like my eBird. Keep going. So I wanted to show you guys what this would pop up with. So it will ask you, you can ID it either by sound, and that's just clicking a button, holding your phone out, and just waiting until it tells you. The other option is by sight, and you can do it the next day, you can do it as you're seeing it. But whenever you decide, it's ID by description. You want to tell them your location, the date, you want to tell them the size of the bird, whether it's as small as like a chickadee or as large as a goose. You want to pick your main colors that you're seeing, and then where did you see it? Was it eating at a feeder? Was it soaring? Was it in a wetland waiting? You put that in and it'll spit out a bunch, and hopefully you will get your answer. But how do those apps and those techniques apply to your own woodlot? Well, this is where it gets a little fun, because now that you've walked your woodlot, you know what's there. You can tell the areas that have more disturbance than others. You can pick out those food resources and those water resources that Joe was talking about. And you can go stick a trail camera up, which is this messed up, but that is totally okay. So the trail cameras you can get nowadays are cellular, so it goes right to your phone automatically. Those tend to have a subscription attached to them. Sometimes you can get about 5 photos for free each month. Other times, not really the case. There's non-cellular, and those are your good old-fashioned SD card ones. I got one right here. She's old, but she does well. This is definitely probably about 10 years old. It's a wild game brand. Like I said, she's old, but she gets the job done. Don't mind me.
Is that one with an SD card in it?
SD card and giant batteries. Nowadays, if you're worried about battery power and let's say you have a property that is like 5 hours from your house and you only get there every couple of months, you can buy a solar panel that you can attach to it, and it'll help keep the charge of the battery going until you get back. Good to know. Well, I'm almost done. So, where are you going to place your game camera? You're going to pick those travel corridors that you've found. This can also be really good to do on habitat edges where 2 things come together, so a forest and a field. a wetland and a forest, pointed at a vernal pool so you can see those birds trying to get those little frog eggs. And then what you're wanting to do is whatever you're trying to go for is about the height you're going to place it. You're going to want to make sure if it's a deer, it's a little bit higher up and pointed at a direction that you can see it, rather than if you're trying to go for maybe, I don't know, like if you pointed at some down logs because you're trying to get a rough grouse, cater it to the species. And if you're not really sure what species, but you just want to have an overarching, place it further away, point it at a trail. Another key thing, you don't want any sun glare. So if you can point it either north or south, you can avoid the glare from the sun. And then lastly, as you're picking your spot, you might find an ideal spot and then there's like a bush in your way and you're like, what do I do? Well, if you don't want to move it, and that's the ideal spot, you could take down a couple of the branches and move them out of the way so you're not setting off your camera consistently.
Can I add one thing?
Absolutely.
So, one thing to add about trail cameras is also depending on where you're setting it up. Sometimes you don't have a great frame of reference for how big the object that's walking in front of your trail camera is, because it might be an open area or it might be an open section of the forest. And so some people will take a grade stake and just pound a stake in the ground, 10 or 20 feet or 5 feet away, so they have a frame of reference. Because I can't tell you how many pictures we have received where someone thought they had a mountain lion on their camera, but it turned out it was a cat that walked really close to the camera. So they're like, look how big it is, it took up the whole camera. And then I point out, well, that blueberry shrub that's right next to the cat is taller than the cat, so it's not a mountain. Oh, good point. And so that's a technique that you can use as well. So
Or you can have grandchildren who walk in front of the camera.
good frame of reference too. Yep.
When I had to move, a deer, we had a buck and it kept crossing the yard, so we wanted to catch this buck on camera. That thing stood in front of the camera and stuck its tongue out.
Do you have a photo?
I have a picture of that. Everybody doesn't believe it. I said, I have a picture where he just stood there and went.
That's awesome. I
That's
love that.
amazing.
Like, how did he know that camera was there?
Now, this reference you were talking about, you put a stake,
Yeah, so like you can take like a grade stake or tomato stake and just like pound it into the ground somewhere so the camera's looking at it. And so then if anything's walking between that and the camera, you can get an idea of how tall its back is. And gives you a good frame of reference.
Mhm.
Sorry.
No, you're okay. That's great advice.
I didn't even think of that.
All right, next, which I think we're at the end almost, but I did want to touch on autonomous recording units, which is what this bad boy is right here.
I pass it on.
Yeah, absolutely. It takes a micro SD card, and you can kind of set it and forget it. If you're going for birds, which is what I'm trying to do on several of our land trust properties, you would set it for about half an hour before dawn to an hour after dawn, and then same ritual at dusk. Or sorry, sunset. Really easy to use, really easy to set up. You have something on your phone that will tell you how long of a battery charge it has left, as well as how much space is left on your SD card. For these ones, I have it currently at 256 gigabytes, but I believe it'll take as little as a 4 gigabyte micro SD card. You just have to play around with it. If you're going to be checking it more often, you might not need as much space. These will be producing what we call a .wav file, so it's just a sound file that you get on your computer. And a lot of times, if you do have this device and you have it playing on your computer, you can stick your Merlin app right up to it, and it will tell you what species you're seeing.
We did it in the office. It was pretty cool.
And if you decide that you want to get a little bit further in the weeds with this, I am here as a resource for this. I think that these are wonderful, especially in remote areas that are harder to get to, and you just want to know what's going on or what's there, or if you have any special species. This is a great tool. If you get into the programming of it, it'll even show you spectrograms, which is what we're seeing at the bottom of the screen. Every species will have their own unique call. And this, with that, you can use it to identify all the species. All right, I'm gonna move on because I think we're at the end. I wanted to point out the morning cloak, which I found for the first time ever. I want to say it was last week, which means that it's definitely spring. And then also a pickerel frog, which I found last night while I was doing the Big Night. And if you don't know, the Big Night is a citizen science project which Joe has talked about already. You can take a portion of a road and you can go help critters cross. And as you do it, you record the data that you have. There is a giant website for it. It is also linked on the Wildlife Corner part of Maine Woodland owners.com. So if you are interested in being a part of it, either now or in the future, like next year, feel free to reach out. I'm certified as one of the people who can host, and now Olivia is too.
Yep.
So
It's pretty neat. You get to just pick up salamanders and help them cross the road.
it's great. Absolutely wonderful. But if there is any questions, now would be the time.
What was the second, just that you had under the nature lookup? What was the second one? You said naturalist, Merlin,
Oh, Seek.
seek.
SEEK. Absolutely. And if you guys want to put it on your phone now, I will be here to ask or answer any of the questions as you're logging in.
And I can attest to Merlin. So, I know almost all my Maine birds by sight and sound. And it's one thing that I had to learn when I was in school. And I joke that Merlin was designed to take my job away because it's very, very good. And so an example would be I would set my Merlin app up in the morning when I'm out doing my chores, especially this time of year. And I'll listen to what I heard for birds while I'm out and about. And I come back to see what Merlin heard. And it's always spot on, exactly correct to what I've heard. And sometimes has caught things that I haven't heard. And so it is a really, really good resource for identifying birds by sound. And it's a tool that's publicly available, but it's really like almost every wildlife biologist you will meet has it on our phones because it's so useful and so accurate. So
I have a camera all around. After my husband died, my just wanted to make sure I have cameras all around.
Mhm.
I have cameras all around the backyard. Camera at dawn, I can start hearing all these different birds, and it's all these different calls, and I'm like, gosh, I wish I knew what was on.
Merlin can
Really,
identify that
I
for you.
can't see them, and I'm thinking, wow, I just tune up the
Yeah.
camera, tune up my phone, and I can find out
Also,
what Merlin
If
says.
you have a photo of a bird on your phone, you can put it into Merlin and it will ID it off of the photo too.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I don't have any photos, because I can't see from the camera what's
Right.
up there, but I can hear them.
That's what binoculars are for.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, that would be.
Well, I don't see any questions online, so I'm going to stop sharing. But I appreciate you guys for coming and listening. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out at the contact below. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
we'll be
Thank you
sending
very
out a resource list with everything we've talked about so far as well, including for the people online, the names of the books that we brought for the in-person people. Any questions that we missed?
Is there another session in the future?
Yes, next week, same time, I'll send out a reminder email. Next week, we will have Nicole Rogers and Andy Whitman talking about the Maine Forest Service cost share program, as well as climate resiliency. We will have the Soil and Water Conservation District coming to talk about their cost share programs. And if there's time, Autumn and I can talk about the NRCS cost share programs.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Happy
very
New
much.
Guys.
It was great.
Thank you. Yeah.
And then this has been recorded.